good morning to all of you. I know some of you have come from far and wide, so you're very welcome. How many lawyers in the house? Raise your hands if you're a lawyer. That's all of you. You're all lawyers. So I'm in a minority because I'm not a lawyer, but it is an honor to moderate this first panel of the first full day of the NBA section on Business Law's Annual Conference 2017. As my esteemed colleague said, my name is Mark Eddo. Mark Eddo. Contrary to what you might see, I am in fact a Nigerian. I'm an undercover Nigerian. I'm the 007 of Nigerians. You'll never see me coming. But my father's from Benin City, so Mark Eddo. And I'm also a recovering journalist as well. I used to be the business correspondent for BBC, and as they said, I run a communications company based here in Nigeria. I'm not a lawyer, but I would say that I'm not a legal eagle, but I'm a legal enthusiast. So I'm very excited to be doing the first panel that is called The Future of Legal Practice. Are you ready? So now the question really is the future of the legal industry. Are you ready? I'm talking to you in particular. Are you ready? Yes. Well, the theme of the conference suggests that the legal profession has some catching up to do, no doubt about it, but compared to other jurisdictions, not just abroad, but even, we could argue, here within Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. It also suggests that if we do not prepare to change, that change will happen to us. So just look at the profound effects of new technology on the legal profession in the West, and increasingly on the legal profession here in Nigeria. Now we're going to be discussing many of these issues on the first session. And for the first session, boy, do we have a stellar cast of crystal ball gazers right here. These are probably the best group of legal futurists we could assemble for this conference. And I will just, we've been through all of them, but I will just go through them again. And starting with Nankunda Kataganza. Nankunda Kataganza consults and advises. She's from Uganda. She consults and advises the private sector governments on regulation and business growth. You're very welcome. You'll be replacing Kem Ihenacho on the panel. Next is someone that is you'll be no stranger to if you're in Nigerian law, Mr. Dotun Sulaimon, who's the chairman of the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria, but also many would know him when he was the head of Accenture for many, many years. You're very welcome, Dotun, to the stage. Also, someone that is very familiar to me, and if you're all lawyers and Nigerian lawyers here, you'll know him as well. Gbenga, or Gbenga, as we like to call him, Oyebode, MFR, who's the chairman and founding partner of one of Nigeria's top law firms, Aluko and Oyebode. Oyebode. I said Oyebode now, I said it correctly. Okay. I said I was from Benin City, not Yoruba. Okay. Moving on, I'll be sitting next to him. And then Mrs. Mia Essien is a partner on the Principal's law firm based in Port Harcourt, are you not? And Lagos. Port Harcourt and Lagos. So you have a strong presence in both areas. Incidentally, Mia is only, and I Googled you, I hope you felt Googled, Mia is only the 7th woman ever to attain the rank of Senior Advocate of Nigeria. That definitely deserves a round of applause. A san. And last but not least, interesting fellow, Mr. Moray Mclaren, Director of Redstone Consulting. I Googled you as well, Moray. You trained and worked as a lawyer. 25 years ago you were a lawyer, but then you moved on to full-time consultancy about something like less than 10 years ago, 5 years ago or so. Moray is co-founder of the Iberian Legal Group as well. This is the publishing and research network for lawyers across the Spanish and Portuguese-speaking world. Are you not? You're very welcome. Give him a round of applause. Okay, so I think it's working, yes? Am I mobile? Yes, I'm mobile. Yes, good, excellent. So without much ado, let's begin. Now we had 2 hours for this session, but we're starting late, so we have about an hour and a half, ladies and gentlemen. So this is how I'd like to, as it's quite a broad subject, the future of the legal practice in Nigeria primarily, or to some degree with Nankunda here in Africa, and are we ready? So I want to start like this. Could I ask all of you the same question, 5 minutes to answer that? So blue sky some blue sky thinking is requested from your own particular and unique perspectives, because we have quite an eclectic mix of thinkers here today. So I'll start with Nankunda, who is right there on the far right, and it's a question that is pretty straightforward. If you imagine being in this conference in 5 years' time, so it would be the 17th or 16th conference. So you get in your time machine and it fast forwards you into a future, a brave future. What will the legal profession in Nigeria, and to some degree you can talk about your own country as well, what will it look like? What's the most clear picture you could probably paint for us in 5 minutes?
Thanks, Mark. Can I just say that whilst I am Ugandan, I was born there, but I didn't grow up there. So I'll try and represent my East African
Where did you grow up? Canada?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I live in England, so
you're Canadian Afro-Saxon, basically.
Precisely, that's very good. So here's what I hope, actually, to see in 5 years' time, rather than what I expect to see necessarily. And that's not a sign of pessimism or anything. At this conference, I would expect to see a tech alley round the corner where we have all the exhibitors. I'd expect to see some really exciting, interesting local Nigerian or African tech companies displaying their wares and demonstrating them, and firms trying things out and buying some of that equipment or some of that software for their use. I'd expect to see, I hope to see several non-Nigerian African law firms at this conference, because I would hope that there would be far greater collaboration between Nigerian firms and their fellow African counterparts, which we don't see that much of. I'd hope to see different sessions on new practice areas in law firms. I'd want, and also critically, that those practice areas would be led by young lawyers, not by older lawyers, shall we say.
That's quite significant. We'll come to that.
Yeah, young lawyers who would no longer be cutting their teeth on endless nights of discovery and reading through piles of paper to show that they're good lawyers, because that doesn't actually show that you're a good lawyer. It just shows that you have some stamina and you can stay up all night reading stuff and not make mistakes. Because you'd be using technology to do all that grunt work.
And so what would be then, because we're in the future now, you've got a young lawyer who's freed themselves up from the pile of paperwork that you have to get through that proves your grit and your worth. What then proves your worth then?
Your ability to think higher up, to, well, what you were trained for, which is to be a lawyer, to be able to be creative in terms of the world that you're coming from. So you're using technology or other, you're involved in consuming the products or services of new types of providers. Everyone uses Uber cabs here, I believe, but nobody's thinking necessarily about what the legal needs might be for companies like that. The digitized economy is going to have new demands, and law firms and lawyers have to adapt themselves to those demands rather than sit there going, oh no, it's all going badly wrong. So I would want to be listening to young lawyers talking about new practice areas of set up on blockchain tech or whatever it is, fintech services, and them talking to their peers and their older counterparts about what they're doing in those service areas.
It's interesting because it makes me think that it's a a funny irony because things would, to some degree, new technology would take us full circle in one way. That if you free yourself up from that, that means that one of the benchmarks in the future is customer satisfaction.
Yes.
That would be a very important thing, that you would be measured on old style. Call it old style. New technology brings in old style customer satisfaction. Am I right in visualizing that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think people will be much more prepared to move on to the next, or somebody who's more appropriate or who will provide the service that they need, rather than, oh yes, so-and-so is a great lawyer, they're a great advocate or whatever, and that we keep going to them. They have to show that they're more nimble and able to adapt to what the client needs. So you'll probably have a TripAdvisor type service that rates the service. There probably is one, actually. Rates lawyers and what they get from them. And then,
you've so perfectly set the stage for this conversation, because one of the things we're talking about is what can we cannibalize from other industries that can help us prepare for the future. And that moves me on to Dotun Sulaimon, who is not a lawyer. No, but you know a lot of lawyers, don't you? I mean, in a way, you're how can I describe it? You're a knowledge-based, I wouldn't use the word expert, but that's if I were to say it in one sense, knowledge-based expert, I guess that's the word. That's what your passion has been.
Knowledge worker.
Knowledge worker has, and that's the passion that runs the red line that runs through everything you've done up to this point. So first of all, quickly, before you give us your thoughts, there are people from all around the world here. I saw some of them on the aeroplane coming over yesterday. So I just want to quickly tell us, the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria, just quickly tell us what you're doing now, and then give us your thoughts and on the future.
Well, the Financial Reporting Council is like the regulatory body that oversees the standard of financial reporting and accounting practice in Nigeria. Basically, that's what it does. And the whole idea is to basically upgrade the quality, make it of international standards, and make sure the practitioners practice to the highest standards of both professionalism as well as ethics. That's what it's all about. Ordinarily should have been one of those government agencies that should operate in the background. You don't hear very much about what they do, but unfortunately, the person that headed it, made it very controversial. So I think it's made it look bigger and more complex than it is necessarily. It's a very simple, boring regulator of accountants.
But you're not boring, so you've got about 4 or 5 minutes. Let me ask you the same question again.
Yeah.
If you imagine this conference in 5 years' time, what would it look like? What would we be talking about?
I would say 5 years is probably too short. In 5 years' time, not much would have changed. Not much would have changed. We'll see our people seated in the audience, not robots.
It won't be virtual.
No, it won't be virtual. Well, there might be some virtual participation in terms of people who can't travel and decide to join the conference by remote means, and so that technology is there. We may be able to use that. But in terms of, I don't think 5 years is long enough for the seismic change or shift that we're thinking about. I think it will continue to evolve. I think it's going to evolve along 2 key dimensions. One of them is demographics. Clearly, the demographics of the audience will change. I won't expect Gbenga Oyebode to be in the audience. Maybe as a special guest the night before. And you expect to see a lot much younger people.
What makes you think that? What makes you think that, beyond the demographics, I mean, why would there be younger, more powerful, younger lawyers?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think nature just takes care of it. Gbenga will be near 70, hopefully, in 5 years' time.
Be careful, he has his 5 minutes after yours.
And nature will take care of that. Of course, much younger people will come through the ranks and, displace the old people and so on. But what you're going to find, in my view, will be probably better, more broadly educated young lawyers. I think their education will be much broader than it is today, where beyond law, they will know a lot more about the way an economy works, the way business works. They'll probably know a bit more about practice management, financial management, and issues like that. So that's what I expect to see, and I hope those who are doing the teaching and so on of young lawyers will take that into account to give us broader, lawyers. The other thing I expect to see 5 years from now will be a lot more technology savvy lawyers, much more technology enabled lawyers, and who will probably draw more on some kind of centralized pool of knowledge, call it knowledge exchange or whatever name is going to go by, that will render the traditional view of a law office being stacks of books and so on. I mean, all of that might be completely obsolete, maybe 5 to 10 years' time. What you see instead of books will be maybe a bank of terminals and and access subscriptions to some centralized database somewhere in the cloud and other kind of stuff. So that's what I see. Other than that, I don't think much is going to change significantly 5 years' time. Now, in terms of the environment in which they practice, it's probably going to be a much more competitive environment. Nigeria may be more open to outside influences, in which case 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it's conceivable that, again, talking about demographics, we'll see a lot more foreign participants in the legal profession in Nigeria. By the same token, maybe for Nigerians having access to other markets as well. But clearly, it's going to be a more open market and therefore much more competitive. That's what I expect to see.
Thank you, Dotun. I move over to you, Gbenga. 5 minutes.
Look, I think that there'll be lots of changes, but not necessarily just at the conference. I think, the Nigerian economy will be totally different, and if the economy grows, Nigerian law firms will grow. The question is whether the rules and regulations that we practice around would have changed at all. And for me, that's a big concern. But to speak to Dotun's issue around demographics, I think that's will be one of the big game changes that we will see. I mean, look, this population growth is at 3% year on year. They tell us that Nigeria will be the third biggest country in the world in 20 years' time. There will be 400 million of us. And this city of Lagos would have 40 million people. Now, that has to mean significant change for those of us that practice law in Nigeria. And the only way that we're going to be able to digest that change is through technology. And we're not going to be able to do it in the usual fashion that we've been able to run our practices up till now. The problem that I see is that historically we've been extremely bureaucratic around change. So
it's not revolutionary, it's evolutionary, or not even that?
It's not even taking piddling little steps. We still have laws on our books that are 1900 laws from the UK. We still have disciplinary rules around the Bar Association that are not fit for purpose.
And what you're saying is, from the inside of the castle walls, which you're in there, not much is being even said about changing that.
Well, look, not much has been said about changing it. The reality, I mean, let me use an example of it. So the section of business law of the Nigerian Bar Association is moving much faster than the Nigerian Bar Association itself in terms of wanting change.
But that's because you're the powerhouse of
well, powerhouse or not, we can't move faster than the generality of the lawyers that we
held back.
So we do need to see lots of change around that. The way we teach law in Nigerian law schools, Nigerian universities, we need to change the way we teach. We need to change the structure of admission to the bar.
What do you have to change about the way you teach? What are you talking about?
So we hire lawyers in our firm. Half the lawyers or half the people you interview, 2 years down the road, you ask them what they're doing. They end up wanting to do
fashion design or interior decoration. And you say to them, so why did you read law in the first place? Well, they read law because they thought it was a liberal arts degree. We can't do that because we're wasting space for people who really want to practice law.
Yeah, but maybe that's because they're demotivated by poor pay, lack of opportunities, and things that limit them. I mean, I asked how many young lawyers or lawyers were in the audience. You see that they put their hands up. I warned you in advance.
Well, obviously that's part of the problem, but I think that a lot of it still revolves around, let me give you another classic example. The way we do the Nigerian law school, where we have campuses around the country, but campuses that are not fit for purpose from the perspective of, we crowd people into classrooms, but we're really not teaching them anything.
And we're
new.
churning out more young lawyers than ever before, right? That's the thing. So many of them are unemployed. You're talking about the employed ones.
So no, but the demographic problem there is that we're churning out more and more people, but we're actually doing it the totally wrong way.
And that has to change if the future.
That definitely.
That's probably one of the most important things.
Definitely has to change. I think again, let's look at law firms. I mean, the top 10 Nigerian law firms all have less than 100 associates, or total number of lawyers that work in them. The top 10 South African law firms have more than 400 lawyers and average out 100 partners per law firm. I mean, the reality is that the kind of law that we are going to be practicing 5 to 10 years from today would be really having a critical mass of people in law firms, as opposed to having the law firms we have today where, they're small law firms, typically founder-led, typically with no succession planning, and typically, if anything happens to the founder, then the firm essentially disappears. Now, those are some of the changes that we would like to see, and I suspect that we will see a lot of technology in 5 years. As Dotun says, we'll see lots more technology around the room, lots more tablets and laptops around the room, but the reality is that in terms of the laws that we practice, not much would have changed.
Okay, Gbenga, thank you. You brought up a lot of subjects, and I'm going to come back to at least 3 or 4 of the things that you've said, but I want to move on now to Mia. Mia.
Yes.
Practicing in the heartland of the oil and gas industry and also here in the commercial capital of Nigeria, you've got quite a unique perspective bouncing between those two, and probably in all around Nigeria. We are looking from your perspective, from your unique legal eagle perspective from up high, looking down into a future 5 years from now, and when we're sitting down here, by the grace of God, what we'll be talking about and the brave legal future we'll be looking at. Give us your thoughts in 5 minutes, please.
Well, definitely when the issue of pay comes up, I'm sure there'll be less hands clapping because all those would have been addressed in terms of remuneration for younger lawyers, which, yes, is recognized as a challenge for a lot of firms. But having said that, I think those that have those challenges have them because of the economy and where they find themselves practicing. The bigger law firms are located in Lagos, Abuja, Kano, Port Harcourt. But I don't have the statistics, but I would surmise that the majority are practicing in jurisdictions outside these ones. And so the level of practice they have would be based on what practice what practice exists in those areas. A significant number of them are not really into commercial practice, so you would have those challenges. Now, coming to this conference in particular, I recall that the first question you asked her had to do with this specific conference. And so one of the things one would expect to see in the future is more technology, like the last 3 speakers have pointed out. In terms of content, I think we should be looking at more areas of specific interest, commercial interest, rather than the general theme in terms of where do we see ourselves, the future of legal practice, which is quite generic. I also feel, as far as the SBL conference is concerned, it should have a more international feel. This conference has been going on this is the 11th one, and it's actually established a reputation for itself. So I think that the organizers should try and set it out there as an international conference and not just a local conference. We should have more participants, foreign participation. Yes, the demographics definitely would change, because hopefully with more purchase power, the conference isn't cheap. With more purchase power, more people will be in a position to attend the conference. In terms of themes and all that, we expect to see more reference to alternative modes of dispute resolution in terms of what's going to be available 5 years down the line, rather than just typical litigation, which is one of the things I think we're going to be touching on at some point. So in my opinion, without repeating what the previous speakers have said, I think that that's where we're heading to.
Thank you, Mia. That's very good, and come back to a few of those points in a moment. In fact, that you've all brought up fantastic. It's musical mics today. Okay, you've all brought up some fantastic points. So, in this mini exercise, last but not least, Moray, Mclaren. Mia talks about an international conference. Well, you are an international legal individual consultant to some degree. And I mentioned earlier that you are a bridge builder to a great degree between different arenas, the Spanish-speaking law world and the English-speaking law world. You move between the two, right? From your perspective, because I know you think a lot about this at Redstone Consulting, when you look at the Nigerian legal arena right now, what are some of the things from what you've seen elsewhere that you think are coming our way in the next 5 years? So paint a picture for us. I saw you do a little laugh there, like, there's a lot coming.
Well, I was expecting a different question, so thank you very much for that.
It's the same question. I'm asking you to crystal ball gaze into 5 years of the future for us.
So I was thinking, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's always very nice to be back in Nigeria. Very nice to be back in this hotel, because last time I was here, I was speaking at the WIMBIZ conference. I was with 3,000 women, and I was the only man here. So it's very nice to have a more equal balance than it was before. When Bumi opened the conference yesterday, she gave us a quote from Richard Susskind. And it was Richard Susskind who famously wrote the book, The End of Lawyers. But he does qualify that by saying the book is called The End of Lawyers, ? And I recently did a conference like this with Richard Susskind. We did the good cop and the bad cop. Richard Susskind will tell you the legal world is turning upside down, and the majority of us will be out of work within 5 or 10 years. But I take a very different approach. I like the quote very much about Mark Twain. When a journalist found him in London, they thought that Mark Twain had died, and he said, I have to tell you, I feel that the rumors of my death are rather premature. So I'm here to be a bit more optimistic and say I think there is a great future for legal services. There's a great future for what we call the classic law firm. But, and there is a very big but here, it won't be for everybody. It'll only be for some of the people going forward. So if we imagine all of you in the audience and currently within what we call the classic law firm, I would say maybe 25% of you in 5 or 10 years' time will still be in a classic law firm model, and the rest of you will be in other type of legal service providers. And we'll go into some of those issues a bit later. But if I was to give my predictions about this particular venue in 5 years' time, here's my top 3 predictions for you, Mark. The first one, of course, is that in 5 years' time, we're going to have different people in the room, because 5 of the local law firms will have merged with global law firms. And when we talk about global law firms, we almost imagine there's an aeroplane full of lawyers in London, New York, ready to come over and colonize. But of course, you know, lawyers can't be made and can't be destroyed. For me, it's like Einstein's E = mc². It will be a simple case that 5 of the major law firms here will have decided to partner with a global law firm. We'll also have about 5 of the major law firms here in Lagos will have done alliances. There's many different models emerging for the globalization of different legal markets, and around 5 of you will be part of alliances with South African law firms, with regional law firms like ALN, or with one of the African alliances. The good news, and I think there is good news here, is that 5 of you will remain the global champions of the Nigerian market. But there is an issue about 5 of you remaining the global champions of the legal market, and I think Gbenga hit the nail on the head. We've recently done research of clients within the Nigerian market, and they tell us that they would like to give 1 or 2 law firms more legal work, but they can't because they're currently not big enough. So part of my prediction is that we will see a large amount of mergers within the Nigerian market because it's what the clients want. It's what the legal service delivery model requires. And I'm going to be rather cheeky here. If I look at the logos behind me, and I see Banwo, Aluko Oyebode, and Udo Odoma, I can imagine 3 types of firms like that merging to be one of those classic domestic champions of the Nigerian market. When we talk about change, of course, the big 4 will be here. So the majority of work that Redstone does, we work a lot for law firms. We also work a lot for the big 4. They will be here. We'll talk about technology in a moment, but those guys know technology very well. They know about process very well. They know about disaggregating a project, breaking it into parts, using technology, and putting it back together again. So a lot of you sitting in the audience will be working for the big 4. And then the big unknown is really the disruptors. No? Who will be the Uber of the legal market in Nigeria? Will it be coming from people in the room, or will it be coming from outside? Last time I was in Lagos 4 weeks ago, I went to a private equity meeting, and lots of people were asking me about opportunities within legal services. The profitability in law firms, and I have to say this very quietly because we probably don't want some of the other industries hearing about this, 30 or 40% profitability, which is what we see in law firms in Nigeria, is exceptionally high. So once the business world appreciates the opportunity within legal services, once the regulators allow that to happen, and I think that's only inevitable, we will have a vast array of different types of organizations providing legal services. And as a start, a simple guess for 5 years' time, when I came in I saw a stand from LexisNexis, and LexisNexis, like Thomson Reuters, they're buying people that do commoditized legal services in places like India. They're starting services like Practical Law Company on providing standard forms for standard work, but they will only work their way up the value chain. So we'll be a very different group of people in the audience here. Second thing is really, let's talk a bit about technology. I had to speak at a conference last year. I'm part of a group called Law Without Walls. I had to speak about technology, and I said, it was a year and 6 months ago, that I was actually disappointed by the lack of impact that technology has had on legal services. But speaking at the same conference this January, I had to get up and I had to say, my thoughts about how technology is being used in law has changed radically over the last year.
Give us the first example that comes to mind that you would use as an example of that.
Well, we talk a lot about due diligence, and I was with Deloitte last week being shown a due diligence technology tool that means that individuals don't have to do it. And by chance, the same week I had lunch with the senior partner, Alan Overy. Alan Overy have done a joint venture with Deloitte for some of their financial services. When you get the legal knowledge and understanding and brand of a firm like Alan Overy, with the ability to project manage and disaggregate, as I said, as Deloitte do very well, we're talking about something very, very powerful. But the simple story for me is I was in New York, and I met a lawyer from England. His law firm were opening up in America. And I said, where are you opening in America? Are you opening in New York? And he laughed and said, Murray, we're not opening in New York, we're opening in New Jersey. And I was a bit puzzled, and I said, tell me why are you opening your firm in New Jersey? Are there lots of lawyers in New Jersey? And he laughed again and said, Murray, there's good lawyers everywhere in America. We're opening in New Jersey because there's legal technologists. So the law firm's called Riverview Law, and when they opened in America, it wasn't lawyers they were thinking about, it was the technologists, and that surprised me a lot. The third big change, of course, and you've hit the nail on the head already, it's about a new generation of young people. And when I have to talk about the classic law firm model, we talk about the Americans talk about this wonderful term, which is a partnership tournament. Now, the English are not typically as clear in their expression, but in this case, their expression is probably better, which is up or out. Or as a managing partner I know very well, talks about FIFO, FIFO. Have you heard about FIFO before? Typically, FIFO is first in, first out, but he calls it fit in or fuck off. Now, we're dealing with a new generation of people.
Is this being recorded? Can you bleep out that part of it legally, please? But carry on.
So I mean, I started a law firm many, many years ago, and if the managing partner said, wash my car, you'd be out in the car park washing their car. Now, we're talking about a new generation of people. There's very positive aspects of the new generation of people, and there's also a challenge for the current model, because if you say to maybe some of you in the audience, we'd like you to work very hard, 10, 12 hours a day, give up your weekends, give up some of those parties in your social life, because in...
No family life.
No family life, because in 10 years' time or 14 years' time, you'll be able to be a partner within this firm. Now, that currently doesn't work within legal services, and we can dig under the Millennium question later. That, for me, is the biggest threat to legal services. As far as developing different business models, we can do that. As far as keeping the clients happy because they have quite changing needs and prices everything for the moment to clients, we can deal with that. But the current thing that law firms globally are struggling with is how to deal with a generation of people that are thinking in very, very different ways from what people have over the last 150 years, 200 years that we've had this classic law firm model.
Okay, so let's open this discussion up now. We have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to things we can talk about here, but let me take it from what Moray says. Moray says mergers and alliances are on the horizon, ladies and gentlemen. One of the biggest obstacles to the modernization of the legal practice in Nigeria was brought up, I think, by Gbenga, is that there are too many small law firms, you know. It seems every lawyer wants to own a firm these days. You go to any shopping mall in Nigeria, you'd be hard-pressed not to find half a dozen or so chambers. Then you enter inside them and there's one guy with a computer, a photocopy and a desk. Nobody else. So the thing is that even firms that have a sizable number of lawyers here in Nigeria have tiny offices, sometimes tiny salaries and tiny amounts of briefs. So only a few can be said to be of international standard. That's where we are at the moment. And I'm sitting with some today.
I don't agree with you.
You don't agree?
No, we've been researching the Nigerian market for the last 5 years. When we talk to the global law firms and we talk to the global clients, they say Nigeria is a place where there's a very sophisticated and very able legal community service.
No, I'm not saying there isn't a sophisticated legal. That's a separate discussion. I'm saying there are a lot of small firms. People decide to go out and run their own firms. That's not the same thing. It's not one or the other. There definitely is a very mature, and we're sitting with a very mature and sophisticated and forward-thinking legal foundation of great law firms in Nigeria. But there's a lot of small firms. There's a lot of people. It's almost as if the young people that you're talking about, the first thing they think about is going out and setting up on their own. Whereas in foreign firms are much more willing to merge, to grow. So should we be encouraging this culture of merging that Moray alluded to that's happening in the future? I'll open that out to Gbenga.
I think it's important that we build bigger firms. I think it's critical that for the largest economy in Africa with GDP of $500 billion, for us not to have the biggest firm on the continent, that shows you that we still have a long way to go. But I think as part of the conundrum is also the fact that when you look across the continent, part of the problem with Nigeria specifically over the years has been maybe the fact that the economy was growing in fits and starts, because you really can't grow a law firm or a business faster than the economy in which it's existing in. But I think increasingly what we're going to see, and one of the great things about, one of the reasons why I think we're going to see bigger law firms, we're starting to see Nigerian oligarchs spreading their wings across the continent. I mean, it's clear that if you have Dangote owning businesses across the continent, one of the big things that you're going to see is the law firm that services him, following him across the continent. At least that's what we should see. We're starting to see across the continent, especially in West and Central Africa, Nigerian banks being some of the fastest growing banks in the region. So again, these banks should essentially take the law firms that service them at home into these markets. So for me, I think that, look, we're not where we want to be. Are we going to see significant M&A activity amongst Nigerian law firms in the short term? The answer is no. And I think that's just driven more by the cultural context. It's not the wish list is that we do want bigger firms. We even if we don't have significant M&A activity, we should have significant growth within firms. But again, it's all driven by how big are we going to grow this economy. The last 2 years have shown that if you grow much bigger than the economy, then you're going to have to shrink when the economy shrinks. That's not a good thing. And so those are trends that we need to watch out for.
Anybody else? My mic is going to get back again. Dotun?
I think it's necessity that is going to make it happen. I think part of the reasons we haven't seen it in Nigeria is because the economy really hasn't grown. I personally don't believe that we can have what you might call a world-class economy with mom and pop law firms. It's just not possible. At the end of the day, it's going to be about scale, and with scale comes specialization, and sub-specialization and so on. I guess the thing hasn't happened because the economy just hasn't grown the way it should grow, but the expectation, of course, that that won't be the same going forward. The economy will, whether we like it or not, we've got to grow this economy, do something about this economy, and claim our rightful place, what you might call the league tables and so on. If and when that happens, then law firms will have to come along. Obviously, working against that trend at several things. Number one, of course, is culture. We have this culture of wanting to own it and be in control and all that. But again, like I said, necessity will make it impossible for you to sit on top of a small firm and expect to compete in a much more larger economy, maybe much larger and much more globalized economy. The other one that is, standing in the way is the law profession itself. Again, as a non-lawyer, I find it very archaic, tradition-bound. Seniority, everything is about seniority and so on, rather than merit and all that. I think we need to see some things there.
So it's not only about pay. It's also about respect.
Respect.
Or acknowledgement.
I mean, you see, because at the end of the day, law is a knowledge business. And when we were growing up in the firm, we always talked about, it's not about who is right, about what is right. In law, my feeling is it's about who. And which is why you go to court, because somebody is a senior advocate, he speaks first or something like that. I mean, things like that will have to give way.
It's holding us back.
Yeah, to make for progress.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a tremendous reaction from the audience on that one. And you will, yes, you're okay. Wait. You're going to be taken up on this. Hold on. This has become a court of law now. Wait. And to my left.
Yes, I'll take Dotun up on some of those things. It's not always about seniority. Most times it's all about respect. What the legal profession drives is seniority, which leads to respect. Okay? If you're incompetent, people will know you as an incompetent senior. So the fact that you're a senior doesn't mean the standard is lowered for you. That's the first point I want to make. And the fact that senior advocates have the privilege of calling their cases first, it's statute. It's statutory.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. The law needs to be changed. Does it make any sense?
No, now hold on. For you as an accountant, perhaps it does not make any sense. But it does make sense to the legal profession. And that is what it is right now. It has not changed. Let's not argue that, because we're not here on the abolitionist or
let me
otherwise.
Say something. Talking about large firms, for example, at the end of the day, what is going to force change in the legal profession will be non-lawyers. Non-lawyers. We've talked about multidisciplinary practices, and so it's going to come. Those who are better organized, like the accounting firms and the consultancy firms, will invade your turf and will eat your lunch. It's going to happen.
We were saying we're talking about the future.
The reason it hasn't happened is because the profession is so self-protective. You have all kinds of rules and regulations as to whether you can't share your fees, non-lawyers can't practice, and so on.
And that could
later, all of that will break down.
And Dotun, you could argue that's the reason why it's not evolving within the rules and the laws and the regulations, and we're still looking at arcane methods of operating, because it's almost like building a wall around yourself, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what's happened. I mean, parallel, what's happening in law, for example, is what's happening in insurance. If you look at insurance related to banking, you find one is more progressive than the other. The reason is one is more open, the other one is more closed. So I think the law has to open itself to external influences.
Okay, speaking of external influences, let me move on to another subject that was brought up. Very quick, simple question for everyone. Should we in Nigeria open our borders to the provision of legal services by foreign firms? Ooh, people said in the audience.
For me, again, the answer is yes. If you're going to grow in scale, sophistication, and everything, and also the economic prosperity of a career in law, you've got to open yourself to competition. It's got to happen. I mean, like in nature, any species that is protected doesn't survive. Longer time, you won't survive. So you've got to open yourselves open to competition. I think the competition is going to come first from allowing multidisciplinary practices before you open it up to foreign competition. But sooner or later, it will have to happen. I mean, Gbenga used the example of Nigeria. If Nigerian firms really grow and Nigeria becomes a dominant economy on this continent, there is no way you're going to, practice law in Nigeria without following successful Nigerian businesses outside of the borders of Nigeria. Now, how would you want to support Dangote in Tanzania, in Zambia, in Kenya, and so on, without allowing, lawyers from those countries to have access to your market? It's not going to happen.
But one point is that it's sort of already happening. International law firms are increasingly doing work here in Nigeria. The question is, how would local firms retain their market share if they're not really ready to compete against these behemoths that are coming from outside, these ILFs that are setting up offices right around the corner from yours? I mean, that is the question that is on everybody's mind. I know you're Canadian, Anglo, Ugandan, but you travel around Africa, and you're in a very unique position to actually compare at least what's happening in East Africa, where regional integration is far more advanced than it is in West Africa, and compare it to what's happening here in Nigeria. From that unique perspective, maybe you could weigh in on this in terms of foreign companies doing business, foreign law firms here in Nigeria.
Okay. First, I'm going to do a little trailer for tomorrow morning's session, which is on globalization. So be here, and we'll be going into a lot more detail on that point. But on the question of foreign law firms setting up or not, I've always been a proponent of that. I think law firms need to think like businesses. They need to see themselves as part of the service industry, which is what they are, and not being some sort of special outside Because once they do that, then they will do what comes naturally to a business that's wanting to grow and that's wanting to continue to keep its clients and get new clients. So that's one thing. So I think thinking that way would naturally lead you down that route. On regional integration, I mean, I can talk about it from sort of my previous position when I was the head of the international department at the Law Society of England and Wales. A lot of our time and work was spent on market liberalization issues around the world, and particularly in the EU, but elsewhere. So moving of lawyers will move to follow their clients, as you mentioned, and Gbenga's also talked about. But also, in order to facilitate the needs of Africa at the moment, which are infrastructure. Mark, earlier you were talking about the intra-African trade being pathetically low.
Yeah, the statistic is that intra-Africa trade as a percentage of the trade that African countries do is less than 15% of the trade that Africa... 85% is exporting commodities.
Exactly.
But now with the advent of the assault on multilateralism, so things like the UN, the World Health Organization are feeling the Trump and Brexit effect. The intra-regional trade is now becoming a serious topic, which means...
It is, and it should have always
Yes, it should have been, but now we're at a point where Africa is starting to take it seriously about trading with Africa.
Absolutely.
With that in mind, we're looking 5 years in the future. We're saying, how can we position ourselves as lawyers for an incoming future where the borders break down between Malawi and Nigeria? That's really what we're looking at.
Absolutely. Now, if you look at the East African example, so the East African community, which is a common market now, so there's free movement of goods, free movement of services. No investor will go into, say, Uganda without thinking about the whole region. They will not be coming in just to provide a service to one. They're thinking about Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, and even accession countries like Ethiopia, South Sudan, etc. So that means their needs are greater, and the lawyers on the ground have to be able to service that investor across borders. The opportunity that there is for Nigerian law firms, for example, is where you have big energy or oil finds in Kenya and Uganda, or gas in in Rwanda. Nigerian law firms have years of experience doing energy work, but they don't see East Africa as a market. Nigerian law firms and businesses tend to think international means outside the continent. There's very little across the continent thinking. And that has to change because the expertise that they have is, many of those places are common law jurisdictions. There's a lot of, they speak the same language. There's no reason why not. So that facilitation of, if Dangote goes across, Gbenga talked about the banks. Those banks have been in East Africa for at least a decade. EcoBank, you find them in the smallest village, So where are the service providers? What happens? Do you just move out of the country and then somebody else picks up EcoBank? Why is there no link between EcoBank's lawyers here and EcoBank's lawyers in Rwanda? Who is making that connection? It should be the law firms.
And that conversation needs to start to be, the first stage is to acknowledge that the problem is there. I'm going to stay on this subject and slightly go to a more specific question. And this one is for Moray. How can Nigerian law firms move beyond being supervised by foreign law firms to working directly with foreign clients, especially in cases, actually, that you do not need foreign counsel involvement? So Nigerian law firms quite often have to be supervised by outside foreign law firms when it comes, instead of dealing directly with foreign clients. How do we move beyond that? How do we become more competitive?
Yeah, what a very, very good question. For the last 4 years, Redstone has been doing research globally with the global law firms and the African law firms. We interviewed the top 40 global firms. We interviewed 20 of the Nigerian firms, and we called the report, the title of the report was Hoggers and Huggers. And let me tell you a little bit about what we mean by hoggers and huggers. Well, actually, it was the other way around. It was huggers and hoggers. So, the huggers are the global law firms that come to a country like Nigeria. They collaborate with the local firms. They develop clients and opportunities together. They're transparent over the fees being paid. So those were the huggers. Unfortunately, in our research, we showed that the huggers, from the local perspective of Nigerian lawyers, were in the minority. The majority of global firms that came to Nigeria were the hoggers. And the hoggers were the ones that would take a instruction from a global client, and they would try and do the majority of the work, and they would restrict the work of the local Nigerians. They wouldn't share knowledge, and they wouldn't collaborate with them, and they wouldn't share client relationships with them.
But they get them to do something, even if it was nominal. What would the Nigerian firms tend to, what would be the work they would do?
So here's the story, and I guess, you will know better than I do. The frustration is the global firm saying, we'll project manage it, we will instruct local lawyers, and we would like you as a local Nigerian firm to do the local part of that work on a fixed fee basis. And we've seen such price pressure, the price pressure increasing, that amount for the local lawyers has gone down. And the question always we get asked from the local firms is, to what extent could we do more of the work? To what extent could we work directly with the clients? And to what extent, we have very, very good lawyers in Lagos, as I was saying, no? So this year, for the first time, we started interviewing clients. So we interviewed the global clients that give work to Africa. And here is the good news. So the good news is they told us very clearly, going forward, they would like to come directly and work directly with local law firms across Africa. And of course, that includes the Nigerian firms. Now, I'll tell you about where they currently are. When it comes to foreign direct investment work, very high profile, very sensitive, they'll go to a global firm. When it comes to something that's cross-border, multi-jurisdictional, they like the fact that the global firms project manage work very well. They're very good at that, so they'll go to them. And in specific areas like banking and finance, which might be in American law or law of England and Wales, they will typically go to a global firm. But the big difference we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years is, in areas like restructuring, they told us they'll come to a Nigerian firm, and in any areas of major corporate domestic work, M&A, they will definitely come to a Nigerian law firm. The challenge and the difference from each client is, they said that they'll come to a Nigerian law firm once they know the market and once they get to know the law firms. Okay? So as businesses have more of a track record in Nigeria, they'll do that. But they told us about the three specific challenges that they saw when they work with the Nigerian law firms. The first one we've spoken about already. It's the fact, from a client perspective, no surprise if they want to come to one major law firm in Nigeria for all of their work. They don't want to work with different law firms. And they know you very well. They know the law firms in great detail. They know the individual lawyers in great detail. They realize that the law firms currently don't have the capacity to do a number of different transactions at the same time. Which goes to your point, Gbenga. You might say your firm is an exception to that because you have almost 100 lawyers. But typically with the law firms in Nigeria, they can't find the one firm to do more than one transaction. The second area that they find a challenge is really, it's about quality of service, okay? I was at a global law firm, Dotun, 10 years ago. We didn't have quality service issues in Nigeria, but the clients told us that from their perspective, if you send someone an email in a firm, you'd like a response in, what would it be, an hour, 2 hours? And if you send someone an email and the day ends and you haven't had a response to that for them isn't the service level required. So they're looking for changes in the way that the Nigerian clients actually communicate with them. They're looking for more responsiveness. And the third issue that the global clients have is that they don't know your firms well enough and they don't know you well enough. But to go back to my prediction earlier, I think there is space for the major domestic firms in Nigeria. I think they're going to get bigger. But what they have to do in the global world is, so from my perspective, globalization is inevitable. You can't hold it back. And I think it's an opportunity for Nigerian firms, not a threat. And we might be able to talk about that in a moment. But the challenge for the Nigerian firms will be is, if you are a domestic firm in the global world, what does that mean? And how do you communicate that? There will be competitive advantage around that. You know the regulators better, you're more closely involved in the economy here. There will be advantages to being a domestic firm, but those that decide to remain domestic just have to be better at understanding and communicating what that means in practice.
Okay, thank you, Moray. We've got 30 minutes left here, and hello? Yes, that's better. I know that this mass of lawyers, bright minds here are chomping at the bit to get at you. Yes, so I think that I have a few more questions here, but I'm going to put them aside and instead stand up, which is breaking protocol. What am I doing? I'm standing up, walking down the stairs, and actually asking anyone who has a question for this esteemed audience to raise their hand. And I'm always impressed by the first person, because it's always in Yoruba they say "Ojuntie," your eyes are pushing you. People are very shy to begin with. But let me see this young man here. Please stand up. Now, I can't get to you, so you're going to have to let him through here. You just tell me who you are, where you're from, and ask your question. Make the question shorter than the answer.
Thank you so much. Okay. I am Rilwan Are. I practice here in Lagos, Fortress Solicitors, City Hall. My question is straight to the point. I learned one of the speakers he said something like that the growth of the law firm has to do with the economy. My question is, can't law firms themselves be attractors of investment and that way influence the growth of the economy in their own little way? And let it be that the economy now is trying to catch them if it can. That's my question. Thank you.
Did you hear that, ladies and gentlemen? The question was, can you be catalysts for the economic growth that we say is holding back things? So what part do you play in changing the economic fortunes of this great nation? That's the question, effectively. Gbenga, it's for you.
Look, the significant growth that we've seen in Nigerian law firms has been over the last, since the return to democracy under the Obasanjo government. And why did we see that? It was because we had a government that was focused on growth in the economy, a government that was liberal, a government that wanted to go out and create billionaires. And so when I make a reference to Nigerian oligarchs out there pushing the envelope across the continent and essentially pushing the envelope within the country, the growth that we've seen in Nigerian law firms essentially tracked the growth that we saw in the economy. So when the economy was growing 7% year on year, we actually started seeing significant growth amongst Nigerian law firms. Extremely difficult for Nigerian law firms to go out there, grow size, but don't have clients to pay the fees to support the firms. Life just doesn't work that way.
Okay, another question over here from a gentleman called Akinlolu Oshinbajo. Any relation? Of course it is. I can see it in your face.
Good morning. Mine is not really a question, perhaps a comment.
And they add to the mix. Have a comment. Go ahead.
Thank you. I honestly believe this is a wake-up call. What we were talking about earlier, we've had Dr. Sulaimon talking about multidisciplinary practice. I think that we have to be extremely careful as lawyers in Nigeria. A lot of people are looking for our lunch. We've got to be very protective of our lunch. Accountants are not going to have lawyers come and work in their firms and be accountants, but they want to work in law firms, or want lawyers to work in law firms and be their servants, as it were, make money from lawyers. We have to protect ourselves. We're not going to also have global practices come into Nigeria and take over our practices. If they're going to let us go to the UK, go to the US, and be part of the law firms there, working in the US, fine. But we have to be protective, where thousands and thousands of young lawyers thousands and thousands of lawyers in Nigeria. We have to protect our own turf. Thank you very much.
Dotun, I think you're going to have to respond to that. He's saying to some degree, and you know what, this is not just law. I mean, I do a lot of conferences, African Union, UN, and when we're talking about trade, we talk about these issues, about a certain level of protectionism that provides a security for us to grow to the strength that we can invite outside and we can compete effectively. So it's not just a legal arena that this conversation that you've just brought up is it's happening in all disciplines, in all industries. But Dotun, I think you spurred that comment, so you need to respond to it.
Well, I think the comment is very simple. I think the theme of this panel is something about change. Are you ready? And the fact of the matter is that change is something that we cannot stop. We cannot stop progress. We cannot stop trends and so on. And the thing about planning for the future is that you have to be aware of the things that you cannot change and you adapt. So you either change or be prepared to be changed. Now the point I made, I can make it again for emphasis, is that multidisciplinary practices and multinational practices will come. It's a case of getting ready for that day. Sooner or later, the protective walls we have around the legal profession will come down. It's going to be forced down by the forces of what you might call economics, necessity. When that happens, the question is, would you be ready? Are you ready to coexist in a multidisciplinary practice by people who do a better job of organizing the practice than lawyers do? Because when we talk about multidisciplinary practices, most people think that it's accountants coming to practice law. No. Accountants simply will organize a law practice better than lawyers organize law practices.
I don't think Mia agrees.
Mark, can I make a
and
quick
Nankunda also. Okay, you're in a crossfire.
Yeah, I'm not actually, I'm in agreement with Dotun, but can I just put this in a different way? What do your client want? That's the question. They're not sitting there thinking, oh, the lawyers must keep them on their own, protect them, go to the lawyers. If they can come to one-stop shop and get what they want from that place, the accountants are there, the lawyers are there, that's what they will do. In fact, the more successful offer you can make to your clients is when you combine non-fee earning workers work with experts in business expertise or technology or whatever, where you have qualified teams providing a service to a client. You'll keep them for life because they will hear all they need to hear in this one entity. So the idea of protection is actually pointless. The question is, what do your clients want?
Mia, okay, go ahead, briefly.
No,
go ahead.
mine actually, I just want to emphasize one particular point. When it comes to law practice, I can't go to Ghana and practice without a license. I can't go to the US and practice without a license. In the same vein, you can't come into Nigeria and practice without a license. We tend to forget that. Yeah. And so we do have that process. If you want to practice, you must be called to the Nigerian bar. And it's the same thing every single place in the world. You can't just walk into Switzerland and say you want to provide legal services.
Now,
that's my point.
It's a good point. You say call to the bar. That leads me to another quick question that I want to ask you. I'm a young lawyer. Finally, I've been called to the bar. It's that moment. I've suffered, I've gone through bar school, and finally I'm collecting this thing that I've sweated blood and tears for. Afterwards, what happens to me? What's the support I receive? Do I even ever get to meet the Nigerian Bar Association ever again? The question is, how do we better support our fledgling lawyers? How do we give them the support that they need? Because we're talking about the future, and young lawyers are the future. Who's first?
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the millenniums, because we tend to talk about the bad news and we tend not to talk about the good news. So here's the good news, is that the legal services is changing at a time when we have a group of young people that are willing to embrace change, okay? If we're expecting our new generation of young lawyers to spend hours sitting in the library looking at books on tax or competition law, they probably aren't the best people to do that. So what the new generation are very good at, they're very good at technology. They're very, very good at taking information from different places. They enjoy projects and they enjoy project management. Okay? The challenge is you need to engage with the young generation, because the young generation they have a higher sense of purpose, and they want to know, what are we trying to achieve here, and what is my part in trying to achieve that? Now, contrast that opportunity with the young generation with that classical law firm we were talking about, the up or out, or the FIFO model. So the FIFO model is very simple. You put the young lawyers in the hopper at the bottom. They sink or swim. Some of them become associates. Some of them fail, or some of them do well, and they become senior associates. And if they put the hours in, if they're able, and have the networks able to, they're able to become a partner. Now that's the bit that we haven't worked out is, will that partnership model, that up or out model, survive with the new generation? Already we're seeing tensions around that, and when we spoke about the pyramid model of law firms, we have to change that already to a different approach where, and I guess this is partly being client-driven, we will have an increasingly different qualifications for people working in law firms with different job titles. A lot of the work, because of commoditization, will be done by paralegals. A lot of work will be around technology. So some of you might decide to go forward, you specialize in technology around law. And then at the senior level, even if you're a very good lawyer, you may not be one of the people that's able to become a partner in a law firm. So there's an opportunity with millennials, and we're just struggling with that. My final comment on the millenniums point is, I organize a program for leaders of law firms at the IE Business School. And I called up the professor that does this fantastic session every year on millennials and what it means to law firms. And I called her up last year and I said, can you please come along and do that fantastic class when you tell us about millennials? And she said, I'm really sorry, Mary, I can't come this year to the class. And I said, why not? She said, because we don't talk about millennials anymore. And I said, why not? She said, well, from all our research, it would suggest that we were a little bit one-sided, we were a little bit stereotypical in the way we described what is a whole new generation of young people. And I said, okay, so if you don't talk about millennials anymore, what is the new message? And she said, it's either as complicated or it's as simple as this. When you have a young lawyer in front of you, just think of them as an individual. Find out what their motivations are and try and adapt your model to that individual. Some may want to become partner in your firm. You embrace them, you look after them because you need those people that want to become partners, and others won't. And if we talked about up or out in the past, our new terminology is grow and go. Help your young lawyers get the skills that they want and understand that they won't stay forever in your firm. They'll go to other places. So we're just having to adapt. So Mark, we're not allowed to use the word millennials anymore. That's been banned.
No, it's not allowed. Gbenga, Oyebode, please. How do we support our next generation? How do we support the future of law?
Mark, I think, and I'm going to just do a quick turnaround on that. I think one of the ways that we're going to support the next generation is to do what Dotun talked about earlier, which is to build bigger firms. I think we need to clarify a point. There's a big difference between the practice of law, which all of us in this room think we know a lot about, and the business of law. And I think that the conundrum, the gap here is people sitting in this room and thinking that the practice of Nigerian law can only be done within the country called Nigeria. That's a great misconception. There are firms in London that are going out and hiring Nigerian lawyers, by the way, people who are admitted to practice in Nigeria. So they write a Nigerian legal opinion, howbeit that they sit in the city of London. So can we understand that nobody is saying that a guy in London is going to write a Nigerian legal opinion without being admitted to practice in Nigeria? I think we need to understand that these walls that we build around ourselves are walls that are going to come down, whether we like it or not. I've always had this discussion around what's the optimum size of a Nigerian law firm. And I'm sorry to liken it to How many Nigerian hotels can you run without operations of an international hotel management company? So Nigerians can run a 20-bed hotel because they have a little washing machine and they wash the clothes and they clean up. But can you run the Nikon Hilton with 900 rooms with local technology? The answer is no. If you don't have a Hilton, a Sheraton, a Fairmont, you can't do it. Now, we're going to have to get to the stage where we understand that you can run a Nigerian law firm, 20 people, paying salaries cash at the end of every month. The day you get to 50 lawyers, you're going to need technology to do it. And what have the accountants done better than us? As Dotun says, the process behind running the business, they've done a much better job at. I hazard a guess today that KPMG in Lagos has more lawyers than most Nigerian law firms. And so that is the reality of our lives. So when an international law firm comes to us these days and talks about association and partnership, I tend to say to them, what we want from you is totally different. You can't teach us Nigerian law. You can't tell us how to write a Nigerian law opinion. However, what is critical for growth of a Nigerian law firm is the backroom operations, the technology through which you run, not the London office that has 1,000 lawyers, by the way, but how do you run the Prague office? Because the Prague office has only 100 lawyers, which is about the size of our firm. So those are the questions that we need to be asking people is, what's the technology behind running a small to medium law firm? Such technology which we do not have today in most Nigerian law firms. And that's a matter of investment, it's of technology, it's of capital, and those are the issues that will make our younger lawyers happy. The fact that we grow bigger firms, the fact that we organize ourselves better, the fact that we create more jobs, the fact that we create wealth and we pay our lawyers better, that's what's more important.
Dotun Sulaimon, I mean, you've devoted your life to knowledge, the knowledge-based work, and so speaking about supporting lawyers, both in training and also when they're practicing, I know this is something you and I have discussed at length. I just want you to give a précis on your thoughts.
Well, like I said earlier, law, like accountancy and architecture, is knowledge work. And by definition, therefore, being knowledge is resident in people. And that knowledge, or the price of that knowledge, can be enhanced by the use of technology and so on, but it's people essentially that do it. So the first thing to do is to create an environment where knowledgeable people can work and thrive. And the thing about knowledge workers is that you cannot keep them for life as employees. You can't.
They
because
move on.
If they are any good,
they move on.
If they move on. If you don't create an environment where they grow and they see a future, they move on, which is what has led to the proliferation of firms that we have in Nigeria, because most people start their firm, they are satisfied with it. If they have 20 lawyers, it's a big firm by Nigerian standards. If they have 1 or 2 partners, they've done very well. And oftentimes the founder wants to leave the firm to maybe an offspring and so on. But they forget that sometimes it doesn't run in the genes.
You bring up an ex.
Or most times.
You bring up an excellent point, the point of succession. Why are we so bad at succession in Nigeria?
Because we don't start out wanting to run the practice as a business. I mean, there's always a confusion, and this is common to all professionals. It's just that some professions are more commercial in their orientation than others. What we're talking about lawyers is common to medical practices as well.
Yeah, and many industries in Nigeria.
The fact of the matter is that if you don't start, you have to start with what you want to create. You want to create a business, or you want to create a practice around yourself. If you want to create a business, there are certain things you need to do from the get-go that will leave the practice room to grow, and all the things you need to do to attract young people, provide the environment in which they will thrive, devote a substantial part of the revenue of the practice to training the next generation, create opportunities for them to grow and so on, and have a performance management system that rewards performance. So that you create an environment where somebody, a bright young person comes in, he or she can pretty much write their ticket in terms of where they want to go and how far they want to go. I mean, I can tell you, for example, when we joined the firm that I joined many, many years ago, I could tell you to the day when you become a partner. And I can tell you what you need to do to arrive at that destination. And if you did it, you will get there. There's no debate about it.
Very interesting.
All the systems, all the structures and so on are in place to make sure that happens.
Very interesting. Dr. Sulaimon, you're well known to people in this room. But so is Soji Awokbade from ILEX, the legal practitioners and arbitrators. I'm going to ask you to stand up, sir, and make your intervention or question.
Mine is a little intervention. I want to drop this gem with you today. I know an African law firm, in Africa, with 400 lawyers in it, and year on year for the past 5 years, their most profitable practice sector is forensics. Now tell me any country that needs more forensic practice than Nigeria. Just tell me. Now that is the subject we're discussing. If you want to keep that plate to yourself, I just equate you to someone who goes to a restaurant where you can order a la carte, when you can go to a restaurant which is a buffet service. I think we ought to think a little more deeply about this subject than we probably are currently doing, such that we do not allow the present to kill the future. Most countries in Africa are not producing lawyers at the rate at which Nigeria is producing. Most. In fact, virtually none matches our progression. 20 lawyer firms are doing well to suck out from that labor market. But 3 lawyer firms are not going to do it. We need things that are big, and like we've been advised, things that are structured, can be organized, results can be measured, and we can make progress. But I have one gem to drop with you. In spite of all the barriers and all the protection that we think we have worked into this system, Nigeria, Africa south of the Sahara, it is in Nigeria that foreign lawyers still take the best fees to their home countries. So we need to be realistic. We have to wake up to the fact that if we do not grow our practices and structures, knowing all the law in the book, not good enough.
Wow. It's never easy to be the first panel of the first full day of a conference as big as this. So I want you all to stand up, please. Stand up. Yes, stand up. And I want you all to acknowledge your first panel. Weren't they fantastic?